Let's see. Okay, I'm pretty sure we're live.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, it's working. Okay, cool. Um, I just need to update the link that I sent out because it's not that one, but I will do that right now and then we'll get right to it. And if people are hopping in live, say GM so we know you're there, unless you want to be a creep and lurk. And then if you have any questions for Reka as we go along, feel free to drop those in the chat too, because we would love to hear from you. And hopefully we'll try and get to everybody's questions as much as possible. I have already sent Reka like a million questions, so TBD if we get to any of those, but we'll do our best. Um, did you see the comment that Wit just left? Reka turned them all into little berries.
I did. That's why I spoke on it a second ago.
Oh.
It's so cute. They're so
It's
cute.
so cute. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get into it. Reka, I'm so excited to have you back on Rehash. This is your second time on Rehash, but your first solo appearance. The first time you were on Rehash was with LDF, all the way back in season 4, episode 1. We're now in season 11. And so it's been a while. That was, I think that aired on, let me just double check. Yeah, February 16th, 2023. So we're coming up on almost exactly 2 years since then. So to start us off, could you just update us on what you've been up to over the last 2 years?
Of course. My hair got shorter.
I love it. It looks super cute.
Thank
You've
you.
got like the Princess Diana look.
Actually, that was really funny. Kind of came out of Bangkok. That I'm the protocols princess now because of that.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
So what I've been up to. Also, thank you so much for having me back, and thank you for the rehash community to that they voted me back on being back on. I do have some updates. So it's been like a good tenure of the 2 years to come back and like say what's up. So wow, since then, oh my goodness. Well, Guild, I'm an advisor now. That happened a year and a half ago ish, a little bit less. And then all last year, I was mostly diving into, I was consulting for a while, but I was also diving into infrastructure. And how that happened, we can get into that later as well.
Yeah.
But I've always been driven by impact and why how I chose my careers for even turning into blockchain from being a veterinarian, and all these decisions in my life were all driven by curiosity, passion, and impact. So I felt like I needed to be further down the stack, and automations have always been huge for me. And somehow I found myself towards found myself being really interested in intents and DeFi automations. Intents were really fun, so I started to build with the team an intents protocol, which is launching soon. But we ended up separating for co-founder differences. We wanted to do different things a little bit. But I was not done with my infra explorations. So I spent a couple months, talked with over 35 teams, and um, did a lot of research, and then talked to their investors about even more sentiment. And I turned every stone, and then I got settled on a few protocols that I found really interesting that are really rethinking the paradigm.
Okay,
Yep,
and
I'm
then
back.
pause real quick. Intense. You keep saying intense, intent infrastructure. What does that mean?
So it's essentially a different kind of it's like not even blockchain, it's just smart contract infrastructure that lets you automate better. At least that was the most interesting part for me, because a user expresses an intent that they want something to happen, and then smart contracts, computers, and programs find a way to make it happen. So it's a much more straightforward, effective way of executing things on chain and with the chain, off chain and with the chain, based on user requests and what people actually want to do. And it's cheaper, it's faster, and it lets us not do every single click that right now when you're on chain you have to do so many clicks yourself, and that doesn't make really a lot of sense. But custody and delegation and the security of that is a big question, but with intents that is kind of bypassed, and you still reserve all custody of of what you have and what you own and all the assets that you're willing to move towards or through an intent machine or an automation system. Because the intent space is built in a way, and most of the protocols are built in a way that it only actually executes when all the conditions that you ask for have been met. Very similar to guild. I don't know if you guys remember me preaching about requirements, roles, and rewards, but it's a very similar pattern. If there's rules that you set, you're in control. You set those rules, you want your exact outcome, and it will only execute when that is the exact outcome that you can get. Otherwise, it will never go through. So you will never lose money that way.
That actually makes a lot more sense when you bridge it like that, like why you transitioned from Guild to what you're working on now with Infra. Because I think a lot of times, like people think of Guild as more of a consumer facing app just because of all the ways that you can use it to build community and, it's like really user focused, more so than it's obviously like developers can do a lot with it as well. But as somebody in marketing, as a user of all of these tools, that's just where my head goes to. And so I was curious why you made the jump from Guild to just like deep down the rabbit hole of Infra now. And the way you bridge that makes a lot of sense because the back end of what Guild was building is the same thing that you're working on now with this intense infrastructure.
Well, that was last year. So since then, I'm in ZK now. So even further down the rabbit
Oh
hole,
yeah.
even deeper.
Okay. Okay. So intense. So you spent a year working on intense, speaking to all these teams. Before we get into ZK, actually, I am curious because you spent a whole year researching intense infrastructure and you spoke to over 35 teams that are working on this, which I didn't even know there were 35 teams working on
Oh,
this.
that's for my ZK job. For
Oh,
me,
that was for your ZK
yeah.
job.
So my
Okay.
timeline is me doing intense for a year, and the last few months of that, when we knew we weren't going to work together anymore, I really wanted to go further down infra, and did a lot of the research and talked to all these teams to see how they're doing things, what they're working on, who's legit, who do I want to spend?
Yeah.
Because like we talked about, I cannot do not founder mode, even if I'm working on something that isn't completely mine from the start. I need to be really, really, really invested. So that's how I had all those conversations and found ZK and my team.
Gotcha. Okay, so then take me down that path of why ZK was the thing that stood out to you after doing research on intense infrastructure for a whole year. Like, what is it about ZK? And then what were some of your learnings about just like where the state of ZK currently is and what the future potential of it is from talking to all of these teams?
Okay, let's start with the journey because I think
Okay.
I'm so happily okay. Disclaimer: I'm nowhere near an expert on ZK. I did spend an awful lot of time on this that I think not a lot of crypto people should spend this much time on it. So maybe this is exactly a perfect POV to simplify a lot of things and explain. So ZK people, don't eat me after this about me being incorrect about math and stuff, but I think there's a very approachable, easier way to explain why ZK is the cool thing right now and why I'm so in deep belief on this and why I chose to work on this. So, the digging kind of was driven by I was looking for something that is more than one cycle. It's not just a meme, and it's actually working on why we care about blockchains. And I think I had to go really deep on that. And I think why we care about them and what they do is they're essentially a trustless coordination system, and that enables all the lunar punk, solar punk, whatever dreams you have. But in either way, it increases human efficiency, and that is very interesting to me in general. So that's why I steal crypto, and then in so many ways somehow like I don't see myself doing like another roll up. Like I feel like I can talk about that issue as well of they're great but they're solving a different problem and they're creating like 10 more. But why ZK has a different approach. So why we care about ZK is in a very overview, and then I can go deeper a little bit, is they what it allows us to do is decouple consensus and execution and bring it off chain. And I'll say more of what this means and why we care about this is because the aspect of verifiability has come from consensus before, but that is a bottleneck of blockchains really. And every network right now is as slow as its slowest node. So if you keep adding more nodes to the network, it's not getting faster. To solve this, we really needed to start rethinking how we work on this because we just kept making more chains, and that solves some of these issues, but it also fragments liquidity and a lot more other issues that we're then creating other solutions for, and then we're proliferating in a different direction that what accelerates blockchain truly. So yeah, the solution there is that we do have to, the attitude there is we have to decouple those processes in blockchain consensus and execution. So ZK helps us with doing that. What ZK is, there's like there's ZK proofs in zero knowledge, and zero knowledge proof have like, zero knowledge proofs have three main like prominent descriptive, how do I say this, like features that we have to think about. First, why they're called zero knowledge, and the zero knowledge aspect of them is that a prover, there's provers and verifiers in zero knowledge, and the prover does not say to the verifier or anyone else that it's interacting with what information it knows. It just shares that it knows, and that information is true because of programmatic, cryptographic, beautiful solutions, math magic. So that's the one aspect. And then there's also soundness, so that the prover can never, even if it doesn't know the information it's being asked, it cannot fake the verifier into knowing. That's the soundness. So you can not fake this transaction or information transaction. And then there's also completeness, so that the prover actually has the ability to give that information to the verifier. So there's a lot of these, but going back to a little bit bigger picture. So it moves a lot of what the limitations have been for chains, which is execution, which is why there's conversations around proving throughput, increasing throughput, speed of chain. This is why you see all those chains that come up that either increase verticalization, parallelization. Everyone works on execution to make that faster, cheaper, bigger. So how ZK thinks about this is that it moves a lot of the more difficult computations that would fill up a block really fast and make chains go slow and clunky, and puts that off chain. Because right now, every single execution that we do and every single thing that a computer has to math out, and you know how crypto works, it's mostly math, they have to do every single calculation. Every node has to do every calculation again. That goes back to the saying of, if you add another node, it's not going to be faster. So moving that away and creating these proofs, essentially, if you think about it, how I think about it, so it's easier to grasp, is you can prove that you've done that calculation before and it was true, so you don't need to do it again every single time. So you can imagine how much things can scale if 2 + 2 = 4. You don't have to do that every time when you want to calculate like I don't know how much finite calculations and difficult equations. And so previously, ZK's been around for a long time, but what the biggest hindrance for that previously is that the tech wasn't really ready, and it was the biggest comment on it was that it's not cheap, it's not fast, it's not accessible. And so last year, though, there's quite a few teams that are working on really, really advancing that. And within the last like 9 months or 10 months, it became 304 times cheaper than it was before. It's almost exactly close to exactly as cheap as normal on-chain execution, but it's becoming more secure and faster. And adding the three main deliverables of ZK here from all those problems that I talked about before is that adding a new node actually increases throughput. So you can actually scale blockchains like way, way bigger. It also adds interoperability, because if I prove with the ZK proof that I've done a calculation, I put that proof back on a chain. So chains can communicate with these proofs. Interoperability through the roof. And then the third aspect, which usually lags behind, and I don't like that it lags behind, but is privacy. And it's because client-side proving will be available really soon, hopefully through these solutions, which just means that a bunch of the computing that you would have to submit to third parties, and there's so many potential violations of privacy in between this sending the information, can be done on your computer or your phone and have the proof and like all these things, so that there's even less people and entities involved. So ZK scales blockchains, ZK solves interoperability, and ZK gives privacy. So like the things that we thought blockchains are a little bit slow or iffy about, ZK does. Not every single ZK project, but that's the general tendency where it goes, is that it solves that.
Yeah, I would love to dive into some examples because I think that's the easiest way for people to understand how these things play out in real life. And I'll start with one that I heard early on, like years ago when I first learned about ZK, and somebody was trying to explain this to me was, for example, if I'm going to a bar, they need to check my ID to make sure I'm 21. But while I show them my ID, they also get to see my address, where I live. Like, what if the bouncer's a creep and decides to come and stalk me down after the bar? They get to see all this information about me that I don't want them to see and that they don't need to see in order to verify that I'm of age to enter their bar. Like, they only need to see one thing, but they get to see everything.
Mm-hmm.
And zero knowledge proofs could take that information, it could run it in the back end and say, okay, this Diana Chen is 21. Yes, like check mark. And that's all that I would need to show anytime I want to go to a bar and show the bouncer that I'm 21. So
Yeah.
that was kind of like a super basic example that was used to explain it to me when I was first learning about it years ago. But I'd love to hear like other examples, whether, with on-chain examples or off-chain real life examples like the one I just gave.
Actually, with the bar example, don't even have to reveal that you're 21. You can just say, or they're asking, are you at least 21? And you just say yes. That's what ZK
Yeah, exactly.
does.
Because maybe I don't want them to know that I'm
Mhm.
actually like old, you know?
Exactly. Other examples, like I honestly like the ones that math people teach of like there's a Where's Waldo one is that there's this Where's Waldo picture and then you like make a cutout and put it over it. Like you say you try to convince someone that you know where Waldo is and they're like, okay, bet. But then instead of you showing it to them, you put this overlay on top that perfectly shows where Waldo is, and then I don't know. Like there's more difficult explanation. I don't think we have to get into that, but I think more on the application side or how this actually becomes usable and fun is what would be worth talking about here. Because literally, what you said example is perfect to say what zero knowledge proofs are, except it gets more complicated the deeper you go with computation. And I kind of feel like I started off us on the deep end there with all those examples. So thanks for bringing it back to the more accessible part. Um, so for what we could build with ZK is we can, again, back on it scales, it gives interoperability and it gives privacy. So all the transactions, all the on-chain actions that we're doing right now can be enhanced with that. So for example, you can have exchanges that are ZK. So they're not only, essentially all on-chain applications will have much more output. And right now, for example, you're building a perp. And even that perp, that's a very complicated application actually to as a function. You are limited by what fits into a block right now. And because of ZK, you wouldn't. So you can mix in even more features that we never know we needed, but we will. And a very general attitude here is so every action that we take now will be enhanced by ZK because of scalability, interoperability, and privacy. But all the other things, like we keep talking with our clients, and I never know what people will do with this immense more amount, like exponential amount of more computation that we have. And then we keep talking with the clients, and every time there's a little bit of an improvement and there's even more computation for them, they fill it out immediately. So the idea is that right now we're here with the amount of computation that we have, especially on chain adjacent computation, and it will like exponentially grow in the next year. So we literally don't know because we're at the stage where the internet is just booming, kind of, or not even not even IAM exists yet, kind of era with compute. And my team doesn't really like this, but I do believe that with the amount of automations that's happening, back to intents, back to AI agents, we will need even more. So not only how AI's infra works, and I don't think a lot of that has to run in ZK at all, but verification of AI's actions, I think will. That's my assumption. And that is also very explosive, as we could see, and a lot of growth. So there's something said about not just on chain, but I think ZK is the technology that will actually, without us realizing, because it's a very back end kind of infrastructure, actually will connect Web 2 and Web 3. And most of the online actions that we take on the internet will be run through ZK.
Do you think ZK is something that every protocol or every on-chain project can benefit from? Or is it like, because it does seem like nowadays everyone's talking about ZK and wanting to implement ZK, and I'm just wondering if this is real and like every team should actually use ZK, or if this is like back to 2022 DAO peak DAO days when every organization thought they should become a DAO and progressively decentralize into a DAO, and no one thought about like why they needed to do that, and eventually realized that like no, actually we don't need to be a DAO.
I think, yeah, it's a very valid question. I had the same sus a couple months ago, but even down to the EF, it has revealed Ethereum's roadmap for the next few years, and it's all ZK for a reason. And majority of the teams turn towards some form of ZK or implementing some form of ZK, aside from implementing some form of AI as well. They will get left behind if they don't do it. So the current landscape, some apps right now aren't in the shape that they can immediately integrate ZK, but there are lighter weight solutions that they can use, and there's so many beautiful infrastructure projects in the ZK landscape that are enabling developers with these tooling. So the only hard thing about ZK is the user will so rarely actually feel the difference. They will just feel like the internet is faster and easier, and especially us blockchain people that were used to like slow congestion and failed things, it will just not happen. And so marketing ZK is like really hard because you don't have too many tangible things, but there's a lot of apps also, bridges, exchanges that are already implementing ZK because they will be unlocked, so to speak. They will become boundless this way and much, much faster. And so if, let's say I'm a DEX and I don't even think about implementing and I keep working the same way as I did a year ago, I will be left behind. So currently, even let's think about Uniswap. Right now, it's quite an expensive, gas-wise, quite an expensive action to take. And if you're a larger scale operation that does let's say 10 swaps a day, that's not even a lot. I think what the numbers are is I think for a bigger transaction, a bigger, more complex transaction, especially that bridging is involved now too, it's like $7 on mainnet. If you do 10 of that a day, uh, it, yeah, like it's
It
significant
adds
how
up,
much
yeah.
cheaper would that be with implementing ZK.
Yeah. When you say that some, like for some developers or teams, it's just not possible yet to use ZK, even if they could benefit from it. What do you mean by that? Do you just mean like it's too expensive to implement, or why is it difficult
I
for
guess they
devs?
just don't know Rust, for example. I don't know.
Okay.
But most of the ZK projects that I know that are pioneering right now are building tech stacks that don't even require you to write circuits anymore, because that was one of the hardships for devs, because it's kind of hard to do that. It was not very accessible, but most projects now allow you to use your own tech stack, use your own code language. You can write in Rust and interact with ZK in Rust, which most blockchain companies, projects use Rust in some way, shape, or form. So it is becoming very, very accessible. But I don't know, like some interactions, it's usually in the decision of leadership. That's why I said it, decision of leadership, some of the interactions. So I think it's less straightforward for them to see. Plus, it's a communication issue, I think, from the side of ZK, of seeing how it can actually benefit them in a super easy way for fairly cheap and maybe even 1 day of development. Because the tech stack for ZK is at the stage where sometimes it takes like a day only to implement these
Wow.
for what an unlock it gives. So
Why
eventually,
why do you think some leaders aren't sold on ZK yet? Like, are there any trade-offs that are concerning or just like not figured out yet?
I think it's still a communication issue. They're not caught up with ZK being almost as cheap and fast as normal execution patterns. So I think they'll catch up. That's one. And there's one more is there are concerns, like the tech is just maturing to be super commercially viable and fast and widely adoptable. So some teams just launching their more public versions of their tech stack, but They're working with teams on more private implementation. So I guess this year, that's why this year is the most exciting for ZK, because it's just got to a stage where it is in the position to get widely adopted on multiple parts of the stack.
Yeah, that is super exciting. And then I also wanted to circle back to like you talking to 35 plus teams over the last year about ZK and stuff, and then ultimately deciding to take a job with RiscZero. A, what was it about RiscZero that stood out to you out of talking to all of these companies that are essentially more or less trying to do the same thing? And then B, just knowing you personally and how how I think we're similar in the sense that like you were saying earlier, like you have one speed and it's founder mode, and it's really hard to like tune it down to anything below that, which is same with me, and which is why I've had a hard time working at companies as an employee, because I ultimately like will switch into founder mode and start caring way too much about the project, and eventually like get frustrated that I care more about the project than the people work, even the founders. So what was it, I'm curious, about RiscZero that made you like that stood out in the ZK space, and then that also made you personally like want to commit to actually taking a job there?
Um, so the teams that I talked with, for the record, weren't only ZK. They were also alternative protocols and some layer ones and some rollups that were thinking a little bit differently about scaling what we have, because that's what I cared about mostly. But why I really quickly narrowed it down to a few companies, and one of them was ResZero. And well, really quickly means like 2 months, but I'm a cautious cat, so that seems quick. Um, I I just kept talking with these teams, and I honestly took our first call with RiscZero out of, I know they're investors. They've been around for a few years. They're really like consistently there, just doing something. I knew they're really prominent in ZK, which is why I cared about them. But I literally took the call of like, okay, let's just see. And then every single call we had, it was just more and more convincing. They're really, really charmed me with their consistency. So not only in terms of their quality of work and their attitude and what they ship and how they think about the industry, but just as people. I've talked to a lot of teams, and they had the most consistent culture and vibe in terms of how they work with each other, their attitude towards work and crypto and life. So that was very, very appealing to me, aside from being top tier team and tech reputably for years, and they keep shipping it. And the founders are not, this isn't their first rodeo, which was also exciting to me, because I mostly, build my own spaceships or work with super early stage things. And this, mind you, it's still a startup, but at least they've done this before in huge Web2 companies, and most of the teams an insane like star-studded, but like more in like from Amazon, Coinbase, like all the things you want, it's there. So the experience and expertise is also really, really interesting, because I wanted to learn more seniority, um, and what they're shipping, because I didn't know they're building Boundless, which is the project I'm on within RiscZero. It's just launching soon. It's a protocol. We can talk more about that later if you want, but it really got me because it does all the things that I wanted, which is it's a very revolutionary way of very openly and proactively and open sourcely bringing ZK to other chains. So not creating another L1 or L2 where you like make people bridge to your chain, hoard all the moat that way. I didn't like that. This is not like that. And this was the only one that did that. I like that attitude. I think it's much more um, building towards the future that I would like to enable. And also excellent tech. It's excellent tech. It's good
Yeah.
people. I'm excited.
So is Boundless like a bridge? Is it like building a bridge, or is it more of like a communications channel that's just educating people?
No, Boundless is a whole protocol. So
Oh,
Z
it's a whole protocol.
RiscZero
Okay.
has built the first general purpose ZKVM and a few more products around the ZKVM that teams have been utilizing to build ZK on their own. Most people have forked initially in 2021 have forked their original open source code, so they've really been in it. Um, and Boundless is their essentially protocol approach to bringing that to every chain. So it's for overview technical purposes from really high level. It's a bunch of smart contracts, it's a lot of cryptography, and it's some off-chain infrastructure. And at its core, there's a marketplace for compute, which is why verifiable compute, and we can talk about the berries later, but there's essentially provers on one side and then demand generating apps, roll-ups, bridges on the other side. And then it's part of a whole stack of extensions and other partners, other prover networks building up as part of Boundless. So we're generating proofs that come from essentially any blockchain app or blockchain itself, and then it goes and settles back on any requested blockchain, inheriting its security.
Wow, that's awesome. By the way, is that where the berry meme comes from? Like verifiable compute, verifiable compute?
And like I've been a berry for like over a year, so me joining the team it's not very as my first order of business, I'm gonna verify everybody. No, that's not how it happened. But yeah, if you hear verifiable compute, isn't verifiable the first thing you hear aside from that? Because for me, it definitely was. But it was joke level. ZK really needs to get off its high horse, in my opinion. Whenever I told any friend of mine that I'm really interested in it and I'm gonna work in it, they were like, hmm. And in my experience, people zone out when you talk about ZK, and I don't like that. As a person who's interested in distribution and growing things and making people care about things, I don't like that. So I really wanted something that is relevant. It relates to it, but it's much sweeter, and it gives me a lot of analogies and visual content to explain ZK and how these infrastructure pieces work without talking about infrastructure directly, which is a blessing.
It's so smart. I think honestly, like take any object, like any, especially like a cute thing, and meme it. That's the way to do it. And that's also, I feel like that's something that you do really well. You did well at Guild as well. And just like in general, you do really well is meming things into like explaining hard to understand concepts in a simple way via memes and cute things like berries.
I
So
think
I'm
I did.
curious.
Sorry.
Oh, no. Go ahead. What
I
were you
think
going
I
to
did
say?
a terrible job in the opening here talking about ZK. I just jumped into the middle of it. I could have done the overview instead, but
You should have done the whole berry thing that you do
I know.
to
I
people.
should have started with the berries. It's a great opener too.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly. You need to get like a berry
Hat.
like hat or something, and just like full send on the berry meme. But I wanted to ask you too about just like your marketing strategy and especially your GTM strategy for a protocol, since that's what you're working on now. When you think about building out and executing a GTM strategy for a protocol, how do you think about that differently from, for example, doing GTM for like a traditional product?
It's harder and easier. It's easier because in crypto, you're building a protocol. People speculate much easier. And you just mentioned testnet in a tweet and you get like 40,000 impressions just of that tweet because you mentioned testnet somewhere. So there's
Yeah.
that. It's easier that way. People like know what to do. They're ready. You just have to tell them what to do and they're ready. They're ready to do the things you want them to do, which is great and exciting. It's much, much less cold start problem than building a more consumer facing or traditional product when you're carving your way out because people get it. Like they know what they're here for. But on other note, to create the other side of that, of actually building out marketing that's interesting and it teaches people something and it is a successful TG is much more than just like some like stake here or bridge here, especially that this is a protocol, it's not a chain. So thinking about it, it's really fun. More on the like hardship sides or challenges slash what I'm working on a lot is this is more of an ecosystem of ecosystems. So I don't have the toolkit in my hand to again like do the bridging, lock in money, grow TVL. All those things are not really relevant here. So what I have to really focus on and do is showcase us as an ecosystem of ecosystems, being this core infrastructure piece, and not only get our message through and our vision through testnet, through going towards mainnet, but essentially create a whole new economy as well. Because yes, we're this enabling infrastructure piece for other ecosystems and chains and apps. But at the same time, on top of the marketplace, we're actually building on verifiable compute. Um, there's a legit opportunity to build whole new financial applications, which is super interesting because no one's done that before. So I'm very excited of building that out later. But for right now, I have to really do left curve and right curve at the same time, which bless the berries. They're really helping me with that, especially like just having something tangible. Great idea. And you will laugh. This is February 5th right now. I came up with the idea of the berries January 7th. So from
Wow.
that was the first time I texted one of my friends of like, hey, I should have like an NFT project or something that's verifiable, compute, and like has berries in it. Until launch, which was earlier this week, was less than 4 weeks. So, I don't know. There's challenges. It's harder. It's easier. Really hard that there isn't as tangible. So the aspect around really supporting your ecosystem and the developers that are using your technology and working really closely with them and finding as many ways as possible to enable them as builders and showcase them and highlight them is core. And I focus a lot on that while making ZK more approachable, more understandable, communicating our vision and our mission and what we are here to do and get people excited about it, and also give them something to do, and also build out a whole new financial market, and also, I don't know, maybe even think about building our own applications on top of it to showcase even more of the consumer facing greatness that it will enable. So it's a lot more layered, but at the same time, the speculations makes things a little bit easier sometimes. Funding's easier than building a, starting
Mhm.
from zero with a consumer product. I've seen so many of my friends struggle with that. I've been there
Yeah.
also. Um, so it's easier and harder.
Yeah, I hear you. One thing that always struck me as pretty challenging for a protocol when we think about like GTM for a protocol is how to balance the developer adoption and catering to your developers and getting developers to build in your ecosystem versus that end user growth. And I think about this a lot in the context of decentralized social with Lens versus Farcaster, where I think Farcaster really went heavy on that developer adoption side of the spectrum, and then Lens went way heavier on the end user growth.
Mhm.
And I don't really know if there's a right or a wrong approach, but I'm just curious to hear how you think about balancing those two, whether it's, I think I don't know if you saw Bram's post on Twitter recently about marketing, and I think the way he thinks about it is like the balance of that shifts as as a protocol grows over time. I don't know if that's how you think about it, but I just love to hear your perspective on that.
I did not see that post, but I get it. And I
Yeah.
think I have it saved for reading later. I don't know. I remember it.
Yeah.
Um, it almost feels like it changes month to month based on what you're focused on. And we're at the interesting stage, or people are usually at the interesting stage when you're both strategizing, researching, strategizing, planning, and executing at the same time, especially that we're a small team. Um, and then it's like a fluctuation between the two. I used to talk a lot about growth cycles and then consolidation cycles in terms of audiences and communities. And I think it's really the same here is you have to focus, you have to pick your winners, I think. Be open of who enters, but then who actually enters, you should support them as much as you can in your ecosystem. And be very proactive about it. That's an always approach, but at the same time, I think you do have to pay a lot of attention on the other side of things. So like the more, how you phrase it, social or consumer facing.
And like end user
Yeah.
growth. Yeah, the
So
end user.
I currently at our stage, super early, I prioritize the developers, but and our ecosystem because it's so early. Like we need things to even give to people, you know.
Mhm.
So it's much more for that, but we also at the same time have to do education, and at the same time we have to make people excited. And it's a kind of a weird market. It's I don't know if I would call it bull market, but there's pumping going on. So with eventual dips, but there's pumping going on. So attention's even more scarce than usually. So you really do have to emphasize the vision and the culture that you're building and really uplift your community and your ecosystem. I think it's always a good strategy, and especially this early and with these phases. Absolutely.
Yeah. I also want to just hear a little bit more about your strategy around I know we've talked about like memeing the berries into existence and using that as a tool to educate about ZK as well. But if you can break down that whole process in your brain a little more for people, like how can people get started with getting those early adopters and really getting not just early adopters but almost evangelists or this cult following where people are just like Kashvi in the chat is like berries will take over, and everybody on Twitter is like berries, berries, berries. Like how do you build up this army of people behind you from day one? What is like the tangible process if you were to coach somebody else into doing it? How would you explain it to them?
It's really interesting because I think so many things go into it. Yeah, it came up with it less than a month ago. But everything else that I have in my toolkit, it's something that I've been growing for 5 years at this point. So it's not like an overnight thing, even though it might look like some of it. What I would give as tips though is I'm a person who focuses a lot on my relationships, and it takes an awful lot of time. And people always tell me that they don't have time. You have the time, you just don't want it enough. And care, it goes so long, so long. There's other approaches. You can totally go the rage bait direction. I personally cannot do that. That also works for other people who are more open to that path. I just can't. I'm not cut out of that strong wood.
Yeah,
I,
I'm
I
with I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
yeah. So for me, it's honestly, you have to make people care and make them excited, whatever tools you have. So for me, I think I'm really good at building my relationships and getting people excited about what I'm excited about. I think it's contagious. So that works, but it's not scalable. So that's what you have to figure out how you scale it across timelines, across platforms, across groups. And it doesn't just scale with you having a team and a larger team. It scales by you creating a bigger mission than yourself and making a larger community excited about it is much easier than you having to sit and chat with everyone and make them excited about your personal reasons. So for me, how I think about it is it comes from person, but it also at the same time it comes from so person's here and the other end is big, huge mission, way bigger than it should be, and it's like unrealistically huge. But that's what people will care about if they don't even know you, and that's what they'll align with. And you have to meet these two in the middle. Plus, you have to put in an insane amount of work hours and honestly get practice under your belt as well with both of these strategies. Building out both is different, but at the middle is going to be where you'll find success.
Do you think it's more effective to focus on providing value through things like technical education about ZK, for example? Or do you think it's more effective to really be providing the vibes and bringing people in through that?
I think it depends on your positioning and how you have decided to position your company and your project. If it's a kind of you're creating a new environment, a new narrative, you'd have to do an awful lot of education. You don't have no other choice. But every other time, you have to pick the vibes. So if you're another layer too. Like there's only so much technical difference that you're actually providing, like very little usually. So you don't have to do that all that much. But
Yeah.
what you do need to do is be different, be memorable, be exciting, be align people with your mission and your bigger things. So if you choose to position yourself as a different player in an existing ecosystem or an existing narrative shape, you do have to lean heavier on the vibes. If you're creating a new category or if you're connecting to that didn't exist before and you brand something new on top of it and you position yourself as the leader of that and the starter, much more education. But something as hardcore as, deep infrastructure, you end up having to do somewhat of a educational route. But for hopefully where ZK Tech specifically goes is that less and less education is required because it's going to be so easy to use for developers who already know how to code and know what they want to build that it's not going to be as heavy of a steep curve. So it's I like educational content. I think you can make it really fun and make education meet with vibes really well. I like doing
Totally.
those types
Yeah.
of content pieces and building messaging strategies around that. But yeah, these are the two differentiations. So it comes from your positioning.
Yeah, for sure. And Kashfi also in the chat is saying providing value is number one. Vibes are the result of genuinely valuable value. So there is, yeah. And I think I agree with that. And I think the best case scenario is if you're able to sort of mesh the two, like you've said, right? Like to provide education about technical things like ZK through berries.
Exactly. Exactly. You have to left curve and right curve it at the same time.
Exactly.
It's the only way
Yeah.
that happens.
Yeah. Do you think that like the way that you see GTM, everything that you talked about in the last, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, do you think any of that changes in a bear market versus a bull market?
I think it's different attention somehow. Sentiment is different. So, for example, sorry, how you position yourself and what narrative you're taking will be different in a bear market than in a bull market, and how you communicate as a team and how you show up as a team will be also different a little bit. Um, I would say bull market, it's like if you think you're doing something crazy, you have to add like 20% on top of that. You're not being crazy enough.
That's
It's
so
saying
true.
we're
Yeah,
disconnected.
that's so true. Yeah. And then in a bear market, how do you keep the vibes up?
Yeah, that's harder. But I honestly really like the bear market vibes. It's so small and so much more. That's where you build your core support. So I think protocols that have timed, or even chains that have timed themselves to build through the bear, they have such more of a strong community because people actually really wanted to be here, much less price speculations going on. Um, I think from a perspective, you would lean even heavier into cultivating community in a bear market than you would in a bull. You can rely on community much heavier than in a bull market type of arena where tensions are high, prices go crazy. There's a lot of TGs happening left and right. There's airdrops everywhere. People can't even keep track of all the airdrops. By the way, why don't we have better tooling for that still? Like, how do I not know? Why
Good
do my
question.
friends have to send me the airdrops that I might be able to claim? It's crazy.
Do you use daylight?
Yeah, it's not all of them. I also use Bankless
I
as a
know.
query page where you can see if you missed any, but it's not. There's things that fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. Last thing, I want to save some time to get through some of our Twitter questions because we had a lot of questions from the community there. So I'm just opening up the list right now. Um, People want to know about the berries. Humpty just hopped into the chat and is asking what he missed about the berries. We had some questions on Twitter about the berries. Ernest came in right away with how did she get everyone to change their PFP because I'm having double takes now with all the berry PFPs. So we talked about some of that. I do actually want to hear your just like very quick, very abridged spiel about using berries to explain what ZK is.
So I'm gonna say very few words on it. I also don't want to spoil all my stuff for later,
Sure.
because it's gonna be. I'm working on some write-ups and animations, but essentially, how I started to think about it. First of all, the words make sense. So verifiable compute, and then how logically it makes sense is it bury is a proof. Hold on, and then the proofs need to go to the market. And then at the market,
Oh,
at the market, there's other berries. And every berry is a little bit individual because they're made out of these droplets. So they're unique berries and they need to be auctioned off to the best buyer. There's also farmers who provide the berries. So there's a there's an analogy here that I'm gonna play a lot into, but also, yeah, verifiable compute, verification. There's so many things you can mean with berry. And so it's huge. And boundless berries just rolls off the tongue. It's so nice and easy.
Oh, I like that. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I love a good alliteration.
And I love consistency and I love unification and I love people supporting each other. And I think it's a very visible way without creating like a full NFT drop out of the gate in like 2 weeks to unify. And yeah, I'm gonna unify more of the feed. So stay tuned for that. But more people are gonna be berries and they're gonna love it because it's really cute and we're gonna make it a little bit of a thing. And then when people find it annoying, we'll make it a little more of a thing and then we'll pivot. Or we'll keep going forever, maybe. I don't know. But on how I made the team berries for Ernest question.
Yeah.
It honestly, I thought very genuinely what I've heard from talking with, doing a lot of research about this team, is they had excellent talent before me, like years ago. Um, and the criticism that I heard about them is that they're so good at tech, they're so good at shipping, they're like such good people. They just never leaned into marketing enough. And I was like, if that's the public perception, let me change that like immediately.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it just made sense that they're so sweet and they were really, it took me a couple conversations to get there by and they were like, my CEO was like, my CEO was like, I don't get it, but it's cute. I don't have a problem with it. I trust you. Let's go. So then I was like, I'll do it. And then everyone was in. It's also something I needed to get them more excited about being online. And this kind of sparked joy within the team, within our community. And that's all I wanted is to for people to be feel happy to be online because I think the timelines in shambles, like there's so much FUD going on and it's gross. So you know me, I needed to bring some light and wholesomeness to it, and I think that succeeded. So on to the next challenge right now. But yeah, they're really with it. I'm so surprised actually. I was very pleased. I
I
did
love
not
it.
expect them to.
I can just like picture the conversation happening of like you trying to pitch these really technical, like
Yeah,
deep technical people about like, hey, but hear me out.
exactly. It was
Berries.
like, so here's the pitch. We're gonna do boundless berries. Uh,
We're all gonna be berries.
we're all gonna be berries. We're gonna talk about verifiable compute, and we're gonna verify our friends, and we're going to unite as a front to help the internet be more ZK and berry, and it's just
I'm I'm excited for where this narrative goes. I hope it becomes this whole thing where like people can get roles, they can become farmers, they can become auctioneers, they can become buyers, they can be all parts of this berry process, this very cute process.
it's silly enough because ZK is so like a
Yeah.
it's like a very it's science. I don't know. It's
It's
math.
scary. It's like intimidating to people. And so by taking it down to berries, you're making it a lot more accessible.
Contrast is a lovely thing. People love
Lovely.
contrast,
Yeah.
and
Another question about berries from Twitter. This is from Salama. Which berries are the best and why raspberries?
um,
Are you
for
berry agnostic or are you a raspberry maxi?
I'm a raspberry maxi. For
Ooh,
eating,
okay.
usually I'm a blueberry maxi, but for all intents and purposes, raspberries are the best for the internet.
For the internet. Well, okay. Are we going to leave it at that or do you want to say
Sure.
more?
Um, I guess just a quick note is we pitched a lot of ZK today, but I would just like to implore everybody to keep building things you believe in and not just what makes you money now, because the things you believe in will also make you money because this is crypto and we make it work that way. So don't forget that too, not just for personal quick, you know, like do bigger things, think bigger, think, think bigger and build bigger and be boundless.
Be boundless. Tell people where they can go to keep up with you on the internet and also where people can go to learn more about Boundless.
Mostly, I'm mostly active on Reka underscore ETH on Twitter, and Boundless is boundless_XYZ. It looks like a berry now. I'll fix the logo soon, but I wanted to make it a berry without fully ruining its shape, so it's a little bit of a berry now too. Oh, and if you're coming to
Amazing.
Denver,
Yeah.
come to my event. It's going to be beautiful. It's denver.beboundless.xyz for signing up.
Do you want to say something about it? What kind of event is it? I'm excited.
We're unveiling more of Boundless and our partners and who we're working with and how it works. And there's going to be a chess match and there's going to be a lot more things. And it's not a hotel lobby kind of, it's beautiful. And my team's amazing and I've been creative directing it. And it doesn't feel like a crypto event. That's all I have to say.
Okay, I can't wait. Say the URL again? Denver dot. Yeah.
Denver.beboundless.xyz.
Okay, perfect. I will go check that out. I'll include all the links in the show notes to make it easy for people to click through. And thank you, Reka, for coming back on. This was so much fun. I learned so much. I cannot wait to keep following the Barry narrative and learning more about ZK from you and just to see where ZK goes in the future. So thanks for taking the time to come back on again. Thanks for sharing your infinite wisdom and fun memes and vibes with us. And we'll hopefully talk to you soon back on Rehash again in another year or two.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for everyone again for voting me in and having me pitch ZK to you so heavy and berries.
Go berries. Thanks again so much, Reka. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back again next week with another episode of Rehash. All right. We are off air now.
Wow.
Thanks so much for that.
Thank you. I feel like I wasn't very concise, but good enough.